January 13th, 1968. Inside Folsom State Prison, one of America's most violent maximum security facilities, Johnny Cash was performing for 200 of the country's most dangerous criminals. Cash was halfway through Folsom Prison Blues when something happened that no one saw coming. He stopped. Just stopped. The band kept playing for a moment, confused. Then they stopped too. The room filled with 200 hardened criminals and armed guards went completely silent. And then Johnny Cash did something that had never been done before in rock and roll history. What happened in the next 11 seconds left convicted murderers and armed robbers sobbing like children. This is that story. And by the end, you'll understand why those 11 seconds mattered more than any song Johnny Cash ever sang. Folsom State Prison wasn't just any prison. It was hell on earth. Built in 1880, Folsom was designed to break men. The walls were 30 feet high. Cells were 6 by 9 feet. Men spent 23 hours a day in those cells with nothing but their thoughts and regrets. Violence was daily. Stabbings, beatings, riots. Guards weren't afraid to use their batons. By 1968, some men had been there for 20 years. They'd watched families stop visiting, wives leave, children grow up through photographs that eventually stopped coming. These men had been erased from society, forgotten, written off. And then Johnny Cash decided to perform for them. Not at some fancy Nashville venue, not on television, but here, in a dining hall that smelled like industrial soap and cigarette smoke. Cash didn't have to do this. He was already a superstar. But he chose Folsom because he believed something society had stopped believing, that these men were still human beings who deserved to be seen. The dining hall was packed. 200 inmates crammed onto metal benches, bolted to the floor. Cinder block walls painted institutional green. Guards lined the perimeter, hands on their batons. On a makeshift stage, 4 pieces of plywood on cinder blocks, stood Johnny Cash. He was 35, but looked older. Weathered face, tired eyes. He'd been awake for 2 days, fueled by pills and coffee, and restlessness. Behind him, the Tennessee Three, Marshall Grant on bass, W.S. Holland on drums, Luther Perkins on lead guitar, Carl Perkins to his left. The room was deafening. These men had been locked in silence so long that now they were making all the noise, shouting, whistling, banging fists on tables. Cash adjusted his guitar strap, looked at the sea of faces marked by violence and regret. His hands shook slightly, but when he gripped the guitar neck, they steadied. The opening chords of Folsom Prison Blues cut through the noise. The inmates erupted. They clapped, stomped, roared the words back at him. They knew every line. They'd lived every line. Asterisk, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. Asterisk. When he sang about hearing the whistle blow, about hanging his head and crying, 200 men nodded, because they understood what it meant to hear life happening outside while you stood still inside. Some inmates were on their feet now, singing, alive for the first time in months. And then Johnny Cash stopped. He stopped completely. The band kept playing for 2 measures. Marshall looked up, confused. Carl Perkins turned his head. Then they stopped too. The room went silent in layers. Front rows first, then middle, then back. Within 5 seconds, 200 men were completely quiet. Only sound, the hum of dying fluorescent lights. Guards shifted. One hand went to a baton. The warden stood still in the back, arms crossed. Cash closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell. He looked like a man praying, or trying to remember how to pray. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 15. 20. This silence had weight. It pressed down like a hand. When Cash opened his eyes, he looked at one man, 3rd row, end of the bench. The man was older than most inmates, maybe 50, gray hair, face lined with wrinkles from carrying something heavy no one else could see. Hands folded, knuckles white. He wasn't clapping, wasn't smiling, wasn't singing. He was staring at the floor, shoulders hunched, trying to disappear. Perfectly, completely still. Johnny Cash saw something no one else had seen in years. He saw a man breaking. Not broken, breaking. Present tense. Right now. Cash looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he stepped off the platform. A guard moved forward to block him. Cash raised his hand without looking. Asterisk, wait. Asterisk. The guard stopped, looked at the warden. The warden didn't move. The guard stepped aside. Cash walked down the center aisle. His boots echoed, each step deliberate. Inmates turned to watch. No one spoke. He stopped in front of the older man. The man didn't look up, eyes fixed on the floor, as if looking up required more strength than he had. Johnny Cash knelt. He knelt on that cold concrete floor. His knees hit with a dull thud. Someone in the back inhaled sharply. The older man's eyes were wet, jaw clenched, body trembling. Cash reached out slowly. He placed his hand on the man's shoulder. The man's body went rigid, eyes squeezed shut. A single tear ran down his cheek, catching the light. He tried to speak. No sound came out. And then he leaned forward. Slowly, hesitantly, he put his head on Johnny Cash's shoulder. Cash didn't pull back. He shifted so the man's weight was easier to hold. His hand moved to the back of the man's head, cradling it gently. The man's shoulders shook. He cried silently, the way men cry when they've forgotten how to make sound while doing it. 200 men watched. No one moved. No one spoke. No one breathed. 11 seconds. Then Cash stood. Slowly, carefully. The older man's head lifted, eyes red, face wet. He looked at Cash for the first time. Cash looked back. Neither spoke. Everything had been said in those 11 seconds. Cash nodded once. The man nodded back. Cash walked back to the platform. He picked up his guitar, looked at the band. Marshall Grant stared wide-eyed. Carl Perkins had tears streaming down his face. Cash nodded at the band. They started Dark as a Dungeon. Cash sang it like a hymn. The inmates didn't shout. They listened. Some closed their eyes. Some cried openly. When the song ended, there was silence before applause began. Different applause. Quieter. Heavier. The sound of respect. After the concert, as Cash was leaving, a young guard approached him. "Mr. Cash, why did you stop? Why do that for one guy?" Cash stopped, looked at the guard with ancient, tired eyes. "Because he needed me to." The man in the third row was Earl Green, 51 years old, serving 15 years for armed robbery. November 1959. Earl walked into a Sacramento liquor store with an unloaded gun, pointed it at the clerk, 72-year-old Henry Watkins. Henry's heart gave out. 6 weeks in the hospital. His family had to put him in a nursing home, terrified forever. Earl was arrested 3 hours later, at $247 in his pocket. That's what a man's life was worth to him. He pleaded guilty. The judge gave him 15 years. Earl had a daughter, Margaret, 9 years old when he went to prison. First year, Earl wrote every week, long letters, full of apologies and promises. Margaret wrote back short letters with misspelled words and crayon drawings of horses. Earl promised her everything when he got out. After the first year, Margaret's letters became less frequent. After the second year, they stopped. Earl kept writing. Every letter came back marked, "Return to sender." By 1965, Earl stopped writing. He'd run out of things to say to someone who'd never read his words. By 1968, 9 years in, Earl hadn't spoken to his daughter in a decade. He had one photograph, creased, faded. He looked at it every night before sleep. Earl Green had given up. Not dramatically, no suicide attempts. The quiet way, the worse way. He stopped going to the library, stopped talking, stopped participating. He became invisible, which is the worst thing you can be in prison. Being invisible means you've stopped fighting. And when you stop fighting, you start dying. 3 weeks after the concert, 3 weeks after a man in black knelt down and reminded him someone still saw him as human, Earl did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He wrote a letter. Yellow-lined paper, penciled down to a nub. 4 hours to write. 2 pages. Started with apology. Not dramatic. Just, I'm sorry. For everything. For the person I was. For what I did to you and your mother, and that old man, whose name I learned too late. It said, something changed. I understand now what I took from you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I love you. I've always loved you. Earl sent it to his ex-wife's last known address. Didn't know if she'd forward it. Mailed it anyway. 4 weeks later, Margaret received it. She was 18, living in San Francisco, waitressing, taking community college classes. She hadn't thought about her father in years. When she saw the return address Folsom State Prison, she almost threw it away. She held it 10 minutes, then opened it, read it 3 times. Halfway through the third, she started crying. 2 days later, Margaret wrote back. Short letter. 3 paragraphs. Cautious. It didn't say she forgave him or loved him. It said, I received your letter. I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad you're trying to change. She didn't sign it, Love Margaret, just Margaret. But it was something. More than Earl had gotten in 9 years. He kept that letter under his pillow. 6 months later, Margaret wrote again, longer this time. Told him about her classes, San Francisco, the diner where she worked. She had a cat named Charlie. Then she asked, what's it like in there? This time she signed it, Meg. For the next 5 years, they exchanged letters. Not frequently. Sometimes months passed. But they kept writing. Earl told her about the prison library, taking a GED course, the vegetable garden. Margaret told him about graduating, getting a paralegal job, dating a good man. Earl wrote back, I'm happy for you, and meant it. October 1973. Earl was paroled after 14 years. He walked out on a Thursday morning. Cold air. $47 in his pocket. Bus ticket to Sacramento. He stood outside the gates, looking back. Thought about the man who'd walked in 14 years ago with an empty gun. That man was gone. He turned toward the bus stop and saw her. Margaret, standing next to a blue Ford sedan. 23 years old. Yellow sweater. She looked like her mother. Earl stopped. 50 feet away. Couldn't move. Breathe. Think. They looked at each other for a long time. Then Margaret walked toward him. Earl started crying before she reached him. He didn't try to stop it. Margaret put her arms around him. They stood there in the parking lot, the place that tried to break them both, and held each other. A guard walked past. A bus came and left. They didn't move. They just held on. Johnny Cash never mentioned Earl Green publicly. When reporters asked about the Folsom concert, he talked about the energy, the acoustics. If pressed about stopping mid-song, he'd change the subject. He never said Earl's name, but Earl never forgot Cash's. 1989. Margaret was working as a legal aid in Oakland, married to David, a teacher, 2 children, Thomas and Sophie. Earl lived in Sacramento, worked as a janitor at a high school, saw his grandchildren monthly, called Margaret every Sunday. One Sunday, Margaret asked about the concert. Earl was quiet for a long time, then told her everything. Margaret cried on the phone. When they hung up, she wrote to Johnny Cash, sent it to his management company. Didn't expect a response, but needed to try. 3 weeks later, she got a handwritten reply. 4 sentences. Your father was a good man in a hard place. I saw that. I'm glad you're together. That's all that matters. Signed. Asterisk. Johnny Cash asterisk. Margaret framed it. It still hangs in her living room next to a photo of Earl holding his grandchildren. Earl Green died in 2003, 81 years old. Hospital bed in Sacramento. Margaret was with him. So were David and the grandchildren. Thomas had kids now. Sophie was finishing medical school. Earl's last words to Margaret. I'm sorry, I missed so much. Margaret squeezed his hand. But you didn't miss the rest. At Earl's funeral, Margaret gave the eulogy. She talked about his mistakes, didn't shy away. Talked about the liquor store clerk, the years of silence, the pain, Then she talked about change, redemption, second chances. And she told the story of the 13th of January, 1968, slowly, carefully, making sure everyone understood those 11 seconds. When she got to the part about Cash kneeling, her voice broke. She cried. So did everyone else. Because this story isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. 11 seconds where Johnny Cash, the man in black, the legend, knelt on a concrete floor in front of a man whose name he didn't know. He didn't do it for an audience. He didn't do it for applause. He didn't do it for a recording that would sell millions. He did it because a man in front of him was breaking. And sometimes the only thing you can do is kneel down and let them know they're not alone. 11 seconds. That's how long it takes to save a life. To show someone they matter. To be human in a place designed to strip humanity away. The inmates at Folsom remembered that concert forever. They remembered the music, Folsom Prison Blues, Dark as a Dungeon, every song Cash sang. But what they remembered most was the silence. Watching a man in black walk down the aisle and kneel in front of one of their own. Watching guards stand still, the warden not intervening. Feeling, for 11 seconds, like they weren't just prisoners. They were men. They were seen. They were human. And no one clapped. Because some moments are too sacred for applause. In 1968, Johnny Cash taught us, fame means nothing if you don't use it to see people, really see them. Not as criminals or statistics, but as human beings, struggling, suffering, hoping someone still gives a damn. Earl Green got his second chance because Johnny Cash took 11 seconds to care. How many lives could we change if we all did the same? If this moved you, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that second chances exist, that change is possible, that 11 seconds can matter more than a lifetime. Drop a comment about a time someone stopped everything to help you, or when you did it for someone else. I want to hear your stories. Hit that notification bell for more incredible true stories about music's greatest legends. Stories about moments that mattered more than the music. About humanity breaking through in the darkest places. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. Not the songs, not the fame, not the millions of records sold. It's about the 11 seconds when someone chose to care. And that choice changed everything.